I don't know if anyone's ever going to read this. Hell, I don't even know why I'm writing it. Habit, maybe. Maybe because if I don't put it down somewhere, I'll start thinking I imagined the whole thing. The elevator groaned the whole way down. Not the kind of groan that makes you worry about cables snapping, more like an old dog complaining about having to move. I watched the depth counter tick past 50 meters, then 100, then 200. My ears popped twice. Station Echo 7 sat 300 meters below the Arctic ice shelf, anchored to the seafloor like some kind of deep-sea parasite. I'd seen the schematics back in Vancouver, read all the safety protocols, but riding that cramped elevator down through solid ice, knowing there'd be nothing but freezing black water between me and the surface, that was different. The elevator shuddered to a stop. Red lights blinked along the ceiling, and I heard the hiss of pressure equalizing. Then the inner door slid open. "Dr. Russell?" A man stood in the airlock, tall, gray-haired, built like he could have played linebacker 20 years ago. Navy jumpsuit with Morrison stitched over the pocket. "That's me." I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped out. The air tasted metallic, recycled. "You must be Chief Morrison." "Clifford." He didn't offer to shake hands. Instead, he pulled a laminated card from his pocket and held it out. "Before we go any further." I took the card. Expected maybe a map of the station or emergency procedures. Instead, I got this. Station Echo 7 Operational Guidelines. 1. Laboratory access restricted to 0600, 1800 hours, no exceptions. 2. If you hear tapping on any window, do not look. 3. Break room off limits when laughter emanates from within. 4. During power failures, remain completely motionless until restoration. 5. Report any unfamiliar persons immediately. Do not engage. I read it twice, then looked up at Morrison. Waited for him to crack a smile or tell me it was some kind of hazing ritual for new researchers. He didn't. "This is a joke, right?" I held up the card. "Someone's messing with the new guy? Keep that with you." Morrison turned and punched a code into the airlock's inner door. "Always." The door hissed open, revealing a narrow corridor lit by fluorescent strips. Pipes ran along the ceiling, labeled with cryptic abbreviations. Morrison started walking, and I followed, still holding the card. "Clifford, seriously, what's with the rules? You trying to spook me?" He stopped at a junction where 3 corridors met, turned to face me. His eyes were pale blue, the kind that seemed to look through you rather than at you. "Dr. Russell, you have 2 choices. Follow the rules and complete your 6-month rotation, or don't, and become another name we don't talk about." He pointed left. "Your quarters are down there, 3rd door. Dinner's at 1800 in the mess. Don't be late." Then he walked away. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, holding my duffel bag and that stupid card. The station hummed around me. Ventilation systems, water pumps, all the machinery needed to keep people alive this far underwater. Normal sounds, nothing spooky about them. I shoved the card in my pocket and headed for my quarters. The room was basically a glorified closet. Single bed, desk bolted to the wall, tiny bathroom behind a sliding door. A porthole looked out into absolute blackness. I dumped my bag on the bed and sat down. The mattress squeaked. 6 months. I could handle 6 months of anything for the research opportunity. Arctic marine ecosystems, extremophile bacteria, maybe even some new species. That's what I'd signed up for, not whatever weird hazing ritual Morrison was running. I unpacked my clothes, set up my laptop, arranged my notebooks on the desk. Normal things. By the time I finished, it was almost 6. My stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten since the flight from Vancouver. The mess hall was easy to find. Just followed the smell of overcooked vegetables. 2 people sat at a metal table, picking at their food. A woman with black hair pulled back in a ponytail, maybe mid-30s. A guy about my age with thinning brown hair and thick glasses. "You must be Vernon." The woman looked up as I entered. "I'm Nova Aguilar. This is Gabriel Ross." Gabriel gave a small wave. "Welcome to the bottom of the ocean." I grabbed a tray and loaded it with what might have been meatloaf. Sat down across from them. "Thanks. Hey, what's the deal with Morrison and those rules?" Nova and Gabriel exchanged a look. Quick, but I caught it. "What rules?" Nova asked. I pulled out the card and set it on the table. They both leaned back slightly like I'd produced a dead rat. "Chief gave me this when I arrived. Some kind of initiation thing." Gabriel pushed his glasses up his nose. "You should follow them. Come on, Don't look if something taps the window. Stay out of the break room if there's laughter. This is ridiculous. The research here is good, Nova said quietly. Focus on that. She stood up even though her tray was still half full. Gabriel followed her lead. They dumped their trays and left without another word. I sat there alone, chewing possibly meatloaf and staring at that card. 5 rules that made no sense. 3 colleagues who acted like I'd asked about their deepest secrets. The fluorescent light above me flickered once. I spent the next week trying to settle in. The research was exactly what they'd promised. Water samples from beneath the ice shelf, specimens no one had cataloged before. I ran tests, recorded data, wrote reports. Normal science stuff. Nova and Gabriel were friendly enough during work hours. We'd discuss methodology, compare findings, argue about taxonomic classifications, but mention the rules or ask about previous researchers and they'd find urgent work elsewhere. Morrison mostly stayed in his office. I'd see him during meals sometimes, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a 1,000-yard stare. He'd nod if we made eye contact. That was it. The station itself was standard industrial architecture. Metal corridors, exposed pipes, warning signs in 3 languages. Everything painted that institutional green that somehow made you more depressed than gray would have. The only windows were in the lab and a few quarters, thick, reinforced glass that could handle the pressure. During the day, you could almost forget you were 300 meters underwater. The hum of machinery became background noise. The recycled air just smelled like any office building. Even the lack of natural light wasn't that different from winter back home. But at night, lying in that narrow bed, I'd hear the station creak and groan. Little pops and clicks as metal adjusted to temperature changes. At least that's what I told myself they were. On my 8th night, I hit a problem. I'd been running analysis on some bacterial samples, and I needed to check my results against the baseline data. But I'd left my laptop in the lab, and it was already 9 p.m. 3 hours past the cutoff in rule number 1. I sat on my bed, holding that laminated card. I stumbled backward from the window, my hip slamming into the lab bench. The figure pressed closer against the glass, and through the murky water I could see more of its face now. Gray skin, stretched too tight, eyes that were just black holes, and the mouth, God, the mouth opened wide, showing rows of teeth that shouldn't exist on anything human. My hand knocked over a rack of test tubes. They shattered on the floor, but I barely heard them. The thing's fingers splayed against the window, and I could see webbing between them. Its mouth moved like it was trying to speak, but no sound came through the thick glass. I turned and ran. The corridors blurred past. My shoes slipped on the metal floor as I took the corner too fast. I caught myself on the wall and kept going. Morrison's office was at the end of the main corridor, past the mess hall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing harsh shadows that made me flinch. I pounded on his door. "Morrison, open up!" The door opened so fast I nearly fell inside. Morrison stood there in sweatpants and an old navy t-shirt, looking more alert than anyone should at 9:30 at night. "What happened?" His eyes scanned the corridor behind me. "The lab. There's something outside the window." The words tumbled out. I went to get my laptop and there was this thing in the water. It had a face, but wrong, all wrong. "Show me." He grabbed a keycard from his desk and pushed past me. We walked back to the lab in silence. Morrison moved with purpose, not rushing but not wasting time either. I stayed close behind, trying to steady my breathing. The station felt different now. Every shadow could hide something. Every reflection in the windows made me look twice. Morrison swiped his card and the lab door hissed open. The broken test tubes still littered the floor. He stepped around them and went straight to the security monitor mounted in the corner. "What time did you enter?" He pulled up the footage on the small screen. "Maybe 5 minutes ago, 9:25. He scrolled back, found the timestamp. There I was on the grainy black and white feed, entering the lab, walking to my bench, turning toward the window, then stumbling backward, knocking over the test tubes and running out. Just me, alone in the lab. "But," I pointed at the window. It was right there, pressed against the glass. Morrison rewound the footage, played it again. Still nothing outside the window, just black water. I saw it. My voice cracked. "Gray skin, black eyes, teeth. I believe you." Morrison turned off the monitor. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Now you understand why we have rules." He pulled out his own laminated card, identical to mine. The edges were worn from handling. Rule 1 exists because they're more active at night. Always have been. During the day when everyone's around, when the lights are bright, they keep their distance. But after hours, he shrugged, they get curious. We don't know what they are. The company that built this place 40 years ago, they didn't leave many records, just the rules. He pocketed the card. Clean up the glass, then go to bed. And Vernon? Yeah? Next time you need something from the lab after 6, it can wait until morning. 3 days later, I was running protein analysis on a new batch of samples. 10 in the morning, well within approved hours. Nova worked at the bench across from me, preparing slides. Everything normal, everything safe. The tapping started soft, rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers on glass. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, my hand halfway to the centrifuge. The sound came from the windows behind me, the same windows where I'd seen that thing 3 nights ago. Tap, tap, tap. Rule 2. Don't look if there's tapping on the windows. I forced my hand to complete the motion, placing the sample tube in the centrifuge. My shoulders tensed. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around to see what was making that sound. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Nova glanced up from her microscope. Our eyes met. She mouthed one word. Don't. I gripped the edge of the bench, kept my eyes on the centrifuge display. The numbers blurred as the tapping became frantic, like something desperate to get my attention. Tap, 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 tap. The door opened. Morrison walked in, moving with that same steady purpose. He pulled up a stool and sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Keep working, he said quietly. Don't acknowledge it. I loaded another sample tube. My hand shook. The tapping seemed to come from multiple points now, surrounding us. What happens if I look? It can only affect you if you acknowledge its presence. Look at it, speak to it, react to it. That creates a connection. His voice stayed calm, like we were discussing the weather. Dr. Park broke this rule last year. The tapping paused, waiting. What happened to her? We found her floating in the moon pool, no signs of struggle, no water in her lungs, just gone. The tapping resumed, violent now. The windows actually seemed to vibrate. I squeezed my eyes shut. Eyes open, Morrison said. That's still acknowledging it. Just work. Think about your data. Nothing exists except what's in front of you. I focused on the centrifuge readout, ran calculations in my head, the kind of mindless number crunching that usually bored me to tears. Now it was a lifeline. The tapping continued for 20 minutes. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes it sounded like fingernails, sometimes like something harder. Bone, maybe. Then it stopped. The silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Is it gone? I whispered. Morrison stood. For now, they always come back, but usually not the same day. He headed for the door, then paused. Park was brilliant, published 3 papers from her work here, but she kept asking questions. Why do we have rules? What are those things? Where did they come from? He shook his head. Some questions don't have answers. Some questions shouldn't be asked. After he left, Nova and I worked in silence for an hour. Finally, she spoke without looking up from her microscope. The first time it happened to me, I cried. Right here at this bench. Morrison sat with me then too. How long have you been here? 3 years. You learn to live with it. Or you leave. She adjusted the focus. Or worse. Later that week, I headed for the break room around 2 in the afternoon. I needed coffee. Real coffee, not the instant stuff I kept in my quarters. The good machine was in the break room, the one that actually ground beans. I was 3 steps from the door when I heard it. High-pitched laughter, like children giggling. Multiple voices, overlapping, echoing off the walls. I stopped. The break room had been empty when I passed it 5 minutes ago on my way to the bathroom. No one had gone in since. The laughter continued. Young voices, maybe 7 or 8 years old, playing some kind of game. I heard feet running, chairs scraping, but underneath the playful sounds was something wrong. The pitch was too perfect, too consistent, like a recording stuck on loop. Rule 3. Avoid the break room when laughter is present. I backed away. One step. Two. The laughter grew louder, more insistent. Now it sounded like the children were right by the door, waiting. My mouth was dry. I really wanted that coffee. The laughter stopped. Silence. Then a single voice, young and sweet. "Come play with us." I turned and walked back to my quarters. Made instant coffee with bathroom tap water. It tasted like rust and disappointment, but it was better than whatever waited in that break room. That night I asked Morrison about it at dinner. He chewed his overcooked chicken for a long moment before answering. The break room wasn't always a break room. Used to be quarters for a family. One of the original research teams brought their kids. 2 of them, boy and girl. He pushed peas around his plate. There was an accident, seal failure. The whole section flooded before anyone could respond. Jesus. The company rebuilt it as a common area. Figured people would forget. He took a sip of water. Things don't forget so easily down here. So the laughter is, best not to think about it. Just follow the rule. 2 days later, I was in my quarters updating research logs when the lights went out. Complete darkness. The emergency lighting should have kicked in, but nothing happened. I sat perfectly still. Rule 4. Remain motionless during power failures. The ventilation system went quiet. Without that constant background hum, I could hear things I usually missed. Water moving through pipes, metal settling, my own heartbeat. Then something else. Movement in the corridor outside. Slow, deliberate. Not footsteps exactly. More like something dragging. My door didn't lock. None of the quarters' doors did. Safety regulation in case of emergency flooding. I sat on my bed, laptop still warm on my legs, and tried not to breathe too loud. The dragging sound stopped right outside my door. I wanted to reach for my flashlight. It was in the desk drawer, maybe 3 feet away. But the rule said remain motionless. Morrison's voice echoed in my head. Some questions shouldn't be asked. Something cold brushed my shoulder. I bit down on my tongue to keep from gasping. The cold moved across my back, circling, like fingers tracing my spine through my shirt. The touch was light, almost gentle, probing, testing. The thing, whatever it was, moved around me. I felt the air displacement as it passed, smelled something like old seaweed and motor oil. It stopped in front of me. I couldn't see anything in the absolute darkness, but I felt its presence. Close, too close, breathing on my face, cold breath that smelled of deep water. My muscles screamed to move, to run, to fight, to do something other than sit there like prey. But I held still, thought about protein structures, chemical bonds, anything except the thing inches from my face. It made a sound, wet, like something with too much saliva trying to speak. Then the lights blazed back on. I was alone. The door was still closed. My laptop showed 11:47 p.m. The power had been out for 12 minutes. I stayed perfectly still for another 5 minutes, just to be sure. When I finally moved, my shirt was soaked with sweat. My hands shook as I saved my work and closed the laptop. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat there with all the lights on, waiting for morning. Waiting for 6 a.m. when the lab would open and I could surround myself with other people and pretend this was just another research station. At breakfast, Morrison took one look at me and nodded. Power outage? Yeah. The first time's the worst. He poured me coffee, strong and black. But you followed the rule. You're still here. What was it? He shrugged. Does it matter? You survived. That's what counts. I wrapped my hands around the hot mug. How do you stand it? Year after year? The work matters. What we're studying here, the extremophiles, the unique ecosystems, it could change our understanding of life itself. He met my eyes. And the rules keep us safe. Mostly. Nothing's perfect, but it's better than the alternative. He stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and Vernon, if you ever see someone you don't recognize, someone who isn't on the station roster, don't engage. Just report it immediately. Rule 5. Rule 5. He left me alone with my coffee and my thoughts. I stared at the black liquid, seeing my reflection distorted in its surface. Somewhere above us, the world went on as normal. People worked in offices with windows that showed sky instead of darkness. They walked down hallways without worrying what might be walking beside them. They turned on lights without wondering what had been standing there in the dark. But I was here, 300 meters below the ice, learning to live with rules that kept the darkness at bay. Mostly. I don't know if anyone's ever going to read this, but I need to write it down, maybe to make sense of it, maybe just to remember. When the lights came back on that night, everything changed. I'd been sitting in my quarters, still frozen from whatever had circled me in the dark. My shoulder still felt cold where it had touched me. The emergency lighting flickered once, twice, then stayed on. That's when I heard the shouting. I opened my door and looked down the corridor. Morrison was already there, kneeling beside something on the floor. Nova stood against the wall, hand over her mouth. It was Gabriel. He was lying face up on the metal floor, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. His mouth hung open too, like he'd been trying to scream. His thick glasses sat crooked on his face. One lens was cracked. "Don't touch him," Morrison said when I stepped closer. He checked Gabriel's neck for a pulse, then shook his head. "He's gone." "What happened?" I asked. Morrison stood up slowly. "Power failure. He must have been in the corridor when it hit. But he knew the rules. He would have stayed still." "Sometimes that's not enough." Morrison's voice was flat, professional, like he'd done this before. Nova hadn't moved from the wall. "His face," she said quietly. "Look at his face." I looked again. Gabriel's expression wasn't just surprised or shocked. It was pure terror. Whatever he'd seen in that darkness, it had scared him to death. Morrison radioed topside for a body retrieval. They'd send a team down in the morning. Until then, we covered Gabriel with a sheet from the medical supplies and left him where he fell. Morrison said moving him might disturb something. He didn't say what. At breakfast the next day, nobody talked about it. We ate our powdered eggs and instant coffee in silence. Gabriel's empty chair sat between Nova and the wall. Nobody took his seat. The retrieval team came down around noon. 2 guys in hazmat suits who didn't ask questions. They zipped Gabriel into a black bag and took him up in the elevator. The official report would say heart failure, natural causes. Morrison told me that's what it always said. "He was 42, I said. "He was healthy." Morrison just looked at me. "You want to file a different report? Explain what really happened?" I didn't answer. We both knew I couldn't. The next few weeks blurred together. Nova and I split Gabriel's research duties between us. She took the morning sample collections. I handled the afternoon data analysis. We worked in silence mostly. The lab felt bigger with just 2 of us. I kept thinking about Gabriel's face. That expression. What could scare someone so badly their heart just stopped? I'd felt the thing in my room, heard it breathing, but I'd survived. Gabriel hadn't. "He panicked," Nova said one day while we were cataloging specimens. "That's what gets you, the fear." "You think he moved?" She shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe he just couldn't handle what he saw." I wanted to ask what she meant, but I remembered Morrison's warnings. Don't ask questions, don't try to understand, just follow the rules. 4 weeks after Gabriel died, I was working late in the research section. Not too late, it was only 5 in the afternoon. Well, within the permitted hours. I was reviewing data on the extremophiles we'd collected from the thermal vents. Fascinating stuff. These microorganisms thrived in conditions that should have killed anything. I was so focused on my work that I almost missed him. A figure walked past the lab window, not outside in the water, inside the station, in the corridor. I looked up from my microscope and saw him through the glass door. A man in a naval uniform, dark blue wool, double-breasted jacket with gold buttons, Soviet insignia on the shoulders. He walked with purpose, back straight, hands clasped behind him, like he was inspecting the station. His boots clicked on the metal floor in a steady rhythm. Click, click, click. I stood up slowly. The man passed by without looking into the lab. His face was pale, almost gray in the fluorescent lights. Dark hair slicked back, strong jaw. He looked about 45. The name tag on his uniform read, Commander M. Duncan. My hand found the rules card in my pocket. Rule 5. Report any unfamiliar persons immediately. Do not engage. I waited until his footsteps faded down the corridor. Then I grabbed the lab phone and called Morrison. "There's someone in the research section," I said. "Military uniform, Soviet Navy." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Where are you?" "Lab 3. Stay there. Lock the door. I'm coming." I turned the lock and stepped back from the door. Through the window, I could see the empty corridor. No sign of the commander. Morrison arrived 5 minutes later with a keycard. He unlocked the door and pulled me out into the corridor. "Which way did he go?" I pointed toward the east wing. Morrison nodded and led me in the opposite direction, back to his office. He locked that door too before sitting down at his desk. "Describe him," he said. I told him everything. The uniform, the insignia, the name tag. Morrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, he opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a manila folder marked with red stamps. Classified. "Was this him?" He slid a black and white photograph across the desk. The photo showed the same man I'd seen in the corridor. Same uniform, same slicked back hair. But the photo looked old. Decades old. "That's him," I said. "Who is he?" Morrison pulled out more documents. Submarine schematics, crew manifests, newspaper clippings in Russian and English. The headlines talked about a missing submarine, lost with all hands. November 1962, Morrison said. Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-19. Mechanical failure during Arctic patrol. Reactor leak. They tried to surface through the ice shelf but couldn't break through. Sank right here, 300 meters down. I stared at the papers. That's impossible. That was 60 years ago. The station was built on top of the wreck site. The company knew, but the location was perfect for deep water research. Morrison tapped the photograph. Commander Michael Duncan, first officer. He appears every few months, walking the same route through the station. Walking? Following his patrol pattern, the same path he'd take through his submarine. Morrison gathered the papers back into the folder. He doesn't see us, doesn't know we're here. He's still on duty. But he's dead, yes. Morrison locked the folder back in the cabinet. They all are. 139 souls, frozen in the submarine below us. I thought about the figure I'd seen, the purposeful stride, the perfect uniform. He'd looked solid, real, not like some ghost from a movie. Has anyone tried to talk to him? I asked. Morrison's expression darkened. 3 researchers, different times over the years. They thought they could help him, maybe let him know the war was over, help him move on. What happened? Psychological breakdowns, all 3, within days of contact. Morrison leaned forward. They said he spoke to them, in Russian at first, then perfect English, said he was recruiting, that the submarine needed more crew for eternal patrol. My mouth went dry. Recruiting. The first 2 had to be sedated and removed from the station, kept talking about their duty to the motherland. The third. Morrison paused. Dr. Yuki Tanaka. Brilliant woman. She followed Commander Duncan into the East Wing one night. Security footage showed her walking behind him, matching his pace exactly. She never came back. Where did she go? We searched everywhere, every room, every corridor, nothing. Morrison stood up. 2 days later, sonar picked up movement in the submarine wreck. Something walking the corridors down there. Something that wasn't there before. I felt cold. The same cold I'd felt when the thing touched my shoulder in the dark. So we added Rule 5, Morrison continued. Report but don't engage. Let them walk their routes. Let them think they're still on patrol. It's safer that way. Over the next few months, I saw Commander Duncan 4 more times. Always the same route, always the same purposeful stride. Once he passed right by me in the corridor. I pressed myself against the wall and held my breath. He walked past without a glance, boots clicking on the metal floor. Click, click, click. I followed the rules. All of them. Every day, every night. When things tapped on the windows, I didn't look. When children laughed in the break room, I made coffee in my quarters. When the power failed, and it failed 6 more times, I froze wherever I was and waited for the lights. I finished my research. The extremophiles were remarkable. They'd adapted to impossible conditions, found ways to survive where nothing should live. Just like us, I guess. Following our rules, adapting to the station's impossible reality. Nova left after 8 months, said her contract was up, but I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. The station had worn her down. We got 2 new researchers to replace her and Gabriel. Young kids fresh from university. Morrison gave them the same laminated cards, the same warnings. One lasted 3 weeks before requesting transfer. The other made it 2 months. They couldn't handle the tapping, or the laughter, or the way Commander Duncan would walk past the lab at exactly 1700 hours every Tuesday. I stayed. kept working, kept following the rules. My year came up faster than I expected. One day I was counting down the months, then suddenly Morrison was telling me to pack my things. My replacement would arrive on the next supply run. "You did good," Morrison said as I zipped up my duffel bag. "Not many make the full term anymore. What about you? How long have you been here?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Too long, but someone has to keep the lights on." On my last morning, Morrison met me at the elevator. The same elevator I'd taken down a year ago, nervous and skeptical about some stupid rules. Now, I understood. The rules weren't stupid. They were the only thing standing between us and whatever else lived in this place. Morrison held out his hand. His grip was firm, calloused from years of work. "The rules saved your life," he said. "Remember that." I nodded. We both knew I'd never talk about this place. Not really. Who'd believe me? A Soviet submarine commander still walking his patrol? Things in the dark that could stop your heart with fear? Children laughing in an empty room? "Take care of yourself," I said. "Always do." I stepped into the elevator, the metal cage that would carry me up through 300 meters of ice back to the real world. Morrison hit the button. The doors started to close. "Vernon," he called out. I held the door. "Yeah? Don't come back. Whatever they offer you, whatever they promise, don't come back." The doors closed. The elevator groaned to life, cables straining against the weight. I started my ascent through the ice shaft, leaving Station Echo 7 behind. I sat in the elevator going up, same cramped metal box that brought me down a year ago. My ears popped twice on the way up, just like they did coming down. Funny how some things stay exactly the same. The laminated rules card sat in my pocket. Morrison told me to keep it, so I did. 5 simple rules that kept me alive for 12 months. I knew them by heart now. Lab access restricted to 0600 to 1800 hours. Don't acknowledge anything tapping on the windows. Stay out of the break room when you hear laughter. Remain still during power failures. Report unfamiliar persons without engaging them. The elevator shuddered and I grabbed the rail. Same spot it always shuddered, about halfway up. The ice shaft had these pressure points where the walls shifted. You learned to expect them after a while. Like everything else down there, you adapted or you didn't last. I thought about Gabriel. His face that morning Morrison found him in the corridor. Eyes wide, mouth open, that look of pure terror frozen on his features. The power had failed and he'd panicked. Nova said it best. The fear is what gets you, not the things in the dark, but your own reaction to them. The temperature rose as we climbed. My breath stopped fogging and the metal walls lost their bite. Somewhere above, daylight waited. Real sunlight, not the artificial fluorescence that flickered in the lab. I'd almost forgotten what that felt like. Commander Duncan would be making his Tuesday walkabout now. 5 p.m., same route through the corridors, boots clicking on metal. I wondered if Morrison warned my replacement about him yet. Probably not. You had to see Duncan yourself to believe it. A Soviet officer who'd been dead since 1962, still walking his patrol route through a station built on his submarine's grave. The elevator slowed, almost there. I shifted my duffel bag and checked my watch. Right on schedule. The supply runs operated like clockwork, every 2 weeks, weather permitting. Today, the weather permitted. The doors opened to harsh white light, Arctic surface light, bouncing off snow and ice in every direction. I squinted and stepped out onto the platform. The cold hit different up here, dry and sharp instead of that wet chill that seeped through the station walls. Wind cut across the landing pad where a helicopter sat waiting, rotors already turning. "Dr. Russell?" The pilot waved from the cockpit. "Ready when you are." I nodded and headed over, boots crunching on packed snow. The surface station wasn't much, just the elevator housing, a small equipment shed, and the landing pad. Everything important happened 300 meters down. The pilot helped me load my bag. "Year contract, right? Don't see many of those anymore." "Yeah." I climbed in and strapped myself into the seat. "Most people last 3 months, maybe 6. You must have seen some things." I thought about the gray figure pressed against the lab window, the children laughing in an empty break room, the darkness that moved during power failures. Just focused on the research. He gave me a look but didn't push it. Smart man. The helicopter lifted off and the surface station shrank below us. From up here, you'd never know Station Echo 7 existed, just a tiny speck on endless white, marking where humanity had decided to build something that probably shouldn't exist. We flew south over the frozen ocean, miles and miles of ice cracked and ridged where pressure pushed the sheets together. Somewhere under all that, seals and whales went about their lives. Normal Arctic wildlife doing normal things, not like the extremophiles we studied, not like the things that tapped on our windows. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and looked down. 300 meters below that ice, Morrison sat in his office, probably drinking coffee and staring at nothing with those tired eyes. Someone had to keep the lights on, he'd said. Someone had to enforce the rules and train the new researchers and make sure they understood. Don't look. Don't engage. Don't move when the lights go out. How long had he been down there? I'd never asked, and he'd never said. Years, definitely. Maybe decades. Long enough that the isolation had worn grooves in his face and turned his voice flat. Long enough that he accepted things that would send most people running. The new researcher would be arriving soon. Some eager scientist looking for career-making discoveries in Arctic marine biology. They'd take the elevator down with their equipment and optimism. Morrison would meet them at the airlock with a laminated card and a warning to follow the rules. Would they listen? Some did, some didn't. The smart ones learned fast that the rules weren't suggestions or hazing rituals. They were survival instructions, written in the blood of researchers who'd made mistakes. Dr. Park looked when something tapped. They found her floating in the moon pool. Dr. Tanaka followed Commander Duncan into the East Wing. Sonar picked up new movement in the submarine wreck 2 days later. Gabriel panicked during a power failure. Heart stopped from pure terror. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. 90 minutes to anchorage. Copy that. 90 minutes until I touched down in the real world, where people worried about normal things like traffic and deadlines and what to have for lunch, where the lights stayed on and nothing tapped on windows and break rooms didn't fill with phantom laughter. My laptop bag sat at my feet, full of research data. 12 months of samples and analysis and observations about extremophile organisms in the Arctic marine environment. Bacteria that thrived in conditions that should kill them. Microorganisms adapted to pressure and cold and darkness. Life finding a way in impossible places. The official reports would focus on that. Water chemistry and cellular adaptations and potential applications for biotechnology. Charts and graphs and careful scientific language. Nothing about the other discoveries. Nothing about the things that made Morrison's rules necessary. Because how do you put that in a report? How do you explain that something pressed against the lab window at night, studying us while we studied our samples? How do you document children who drowned 40 years ago but still laugh in the break room? How do you write up encounters with a Soviet officer who died before the station existed? You don't. You write about dissolved oxygen levels and taxonomic classifications. You submit your findings to journals that want data, not ghost stories. You go to conferences and present your research and never mention why you made instant coffee in your quarters instead of using the break room. The helicopter banked left, following the coastline. Land appeared below, actual solid ground with trees and roads and buildings. Normal places where normal people lived normal lives. I'd be one of them again soon. Back to teaching undergraduate courses and writing grant proposals and attending faculty meetings. Back to problems that made sense. My shoulder still felt cold sometimes, the spot where something touched me during that first power failure. Morrison said not to think about it, but you can't unfeel something like that. The weight of it, the deliberate way it pressed down, like it was claiming me. I shifted in my seat and watched the landscape change below. More trees now, scattered buildings becoming towns, civilization creeping back into view. Each mile took me further from Station Echo 7, but I knew I'd never really leave it behind. You can't unknow things. You can't unsee that gray face pressed against glass or unhear boots clicking down empty corridors. The research facility appeared ahead, a cluster of modern buildings on the outskirts of Anchorage. Clean lines and lots of windows, natural light everywhere. The kind of place where scientists did science without needing survival rules. We touched down on the helipad and the rotors wound down. I grabbed my bags and climbed out, legs stiff from sitting. The air smelled different here, pine trees and vehicle exhaust instead of recycled oxygen and industrial cleaning solution. Good luck with your debrief, the pilot said. Thanks. I walked across the tarmac to the main building. Glass doors slid open automatically, motion sensors, not manual airlocks. The lobby was all polished floors and potted plants. A receptionist smiled from behind a curved desk. "Dr. Russell, they're expecting you in conference room 3, down the hall, second door on the right." I found the room easily. 3 people sat at a polished table, 2 men and a woman, all in business casual instead of navy jumpsuits. They had tablets and coffee cups and normal expressions. No 1,000-yard stares, no survival rules. "Vernon, good to have you back." Dr. Harrison stood and shook my hand. He ran the Arctic research program, though he'd never been below the ice himself. "How was your year at Echo 7? "Productive." I sat down and pulled out my laptop. "I have 12 months of data on extremophile populations. Some interesting findings on metabolic adaptations." "Excellent. We're eager to see what you've discovered." I opened my files and started my presentation. Temperature gradients and chemical analyses, bacterial cultures that thrived where nothing should live, all very scientific, all very normal. They asked about methodology and sample sizes. I answered with facts and figures. We discussed publication strategies and future research directions. Nobody asked about the rules. Nobody wondered why researchers kept leaving early or why some didn't leave at all. The meeting wrapped up after 2 hours, handshakes and promises to review my full report. "Welcome back to the academic world, Dr. Russell. Your office is ready whenever you want to start teaching again." I walked out into afternoon sunlight. Real sun, warm on my face even in the Arctic air. My rental car waited in the visitor lot. They'd arranged everything for my return. Apartment near campus, office with a window, normal life ready to resume. But first I had to submit my samples to the main lab. 12 months of specimens preserved in specialized containers. Bacteria and microorganisms that could revolutionize our understanding of life in extreme environments. That was the real value of Station Echo 7. That was why they kept it running despite everything else. I drove through Anchorage traffic, adjusting to cars and stoplights and pedestrians. So many people, all unaware of what existed beneath the Arctic ice. They worried about mortgages and relationships and what to watch on TV. They complained when the power went out for 5 minutes during a storm. They'd never frozen in place while something circled them in the dark, never ignored desperate tapping on windows, never stepped aside to let a dead man pass in the corridor. Lucky them. The lab facility sat on the university campus, another modern building full of bright spaces and expensive equipment. I checked in at security and headed to the specimen storage area. Dr. Martinez met me there, excited to process the samples. "A full year's worth," she said, examining the containers. "This is incredible. The continuity alone makes this invaluable for longitudinal studies." Yeah, consistency was important. She didn't catch the edge in my voice. Why would she? To her, this was just another research project. Extreme environment biology, cutting-edge science. The kind of work that got you published in Nature. We logged each sample and transferred them to long-term storage. 12 months reduced to barcode labels and freezer locations. All that time below the ice, condensed into neat rows of vials. "The preliminary data looks fascinating," Martinez said. "These metabolic rates are unlike anything we've seen. The environment down there is unique. I can imagine. The pressure alone must create interesting conditions." Pressure. Yeah, that was one word for it. The weight of water above you. The weight of rules keeping you safe. The weight of knowledge you couldn't share. I finished the handoff and drove to my new apartment. 3rd floor, good view of the mountains. The landlord had left the keys under the mat as promised. I carried my bags up and let myself in. It was nice, clean and modern with plenty of light. Full kitchen, comfortable furniture, normal bathroom with a door that swung instead of sliding. The kind of place where you could pretend the last year hadn't happened. I unpacked slowly. Clothes in the dresser, books on the shelf, laptop on the desk by the window. My apartment at Echo 7 had been 60 square feet with a porthole showing black water. This place had a living room and bedroom and windows showing sky. The rules card sat in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and looked at it again. Laminated plastic, slightly worn at the edges from a year of handling. 5 simple statements that meant the difference between completing your contract and becoming another name they didn't talk about. I should throw it away. I was done with Station Echo 7, safe on the surface with my data submitted and my obligations complete. No reason to keep a reminder of that place, but I put it in my desk drawer instead. Top right, where I'd see it every time I reached for a pen. Morrison was right. The rules saved my life. That was worth remembering. My phone buzzed. Email from the department chair welcoming me back. Classes started in 2 weeks if I felt ready. Office hours, committee meetings, all the normal academic responsibilities waiting to resume. I typed a reply saying I'd be there. Back to teaching eager undergrads about marine biology. Back to faculty politics and grant writing. Back to pretending the most interesting thing about my research was metabolic adaptation in cold water bacteria. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink. Beautiful, natural, nothing like the artificial day-night cycle in the station. I stood at the window and watched it fade, remembering how we marked time by clocks instead of sky. Somewhere far north, that same sun set over endless ice. The surface station would be switching to night mode. The helicopter pilot would be filing his report. And 300 meters down, the fluorescent lights would keep humming. Morrison would be making his rounds, checking doors, monitoring systems, making sure everyone followed the rules. The new researcher would be settling into their quarters, maybe wondering why their room had a lock on the inside, maybe reading that laminated card and thinking it was some kind of joke. They'd learn. Everyone learned eventually, one way or another. The smart ones learned by listening. The others learned harder lessons. I closed the blinds and made dinner in my normal kitchen. Pasta with sauce from a jar, vegetables that hadn't been frozen for months, fresh bread from an actual bakery, simple pleasures that felt like luxuries after a year of cafeteria meals. The apartment was quiet. No ventilation systems or water pumps. No distant mechanical sounds through the walls. Just traffic outside and neighbors moving around. Normal noise from normal people living normal lives. I'd adjust. Give it a few weeks and this would feel real again. The memories would fade to something manageable. The cold spot on my shoulder would warm up. The urge to check corners before entering rooms would pass. But tonight, my first night back, I double-checked the locks. Made sure the lights all worked. Kept my phone charged and close by. Old habits from a place where darkness meant danger and you never knew when the power might fail. I lay in bed, a real bed, queen-sized with soft sheets, and stared at the ceiling. No porthole here, no black water pressing against glass, just ordinary darkness that came from turning off the lights. Tomorrow I'd start rebuilding my surface life. Meet with colleagues, set up my office, prepare for classes. I'd talk about my research in careful scientific terms. I'd smile and nod when people said how exciting it must have been. I'd keep the real stories locked away where they belonged, because Morrison was right about that too. Nobody would believe the truth. Nobody wanted to hear about the things that made Station Echo 7 special. They wanted data on extremophiles, not tales of dead children laughing in break rooms. So that's what I'd give them. Papers and presentations about life in impossible places. Valuable research that justified keeping the station operational. Scientific advancement built on a foundation of rules and silence. I rolled over and closed my eyes. Somewhere below the Arctic ice, my replacement was probably lying in that narrow bed, listening to the station sounds and wondering what they'd gotten into. Wondering if the rules were real. Wondering what happened to the researchers who came before. They'd find out. We all found out eventually. And if they were smart, if they were lucky, they'd last long enough to take their own elevator ride back to the surface, back to warmth and light and the blessed ignorance of everyone who'd never been 300 meters down. I pulled the covers up and let sleep take me. No more Station Echo 7. No more rules to follow. No more shadows in the corridors or faces at the windows. Just normal life, waiting to welcome me back. If I could remember how to live it.